How's it going, guys, and welcome back to the channel. Today I showed you the step-by-step on how to exchange the rear shock of your CRF300L. Let's get started. Just a few comments before we get started. In order to do the service, you need to find a way to keep the rear of your motorcycles or the rear tire, the rear suspension completely off the ground. Even though I'm using a CRF300L for this video, if you want to use this as a guide for a different motorcycle, the idea of what you have to do is more or less the same for any motorcycle that has a linkage system with a rear suspension. And finally, since I'm already doing this job, I'm going to take the opportunity to also re-grease the linkage system. So I recommend you to do the same. If you don't want, you can skip it, but I'm going to show also how to do that because just a few extra minutes since we are already there. The sizing of the sockets or wrench that you're going to need to use, it's always the same. You need a 17mm for the left side of the motorcycle and a 14mm to the right side of the motorcycle. First, we're going to remove this nut. That's a 17. So now we're going to remove this nut. And just pay attention that on this one you also have a washer and a nut. So now we're on the opposite side, on the right side of the motorcycle, and you have this spring for the rear brake. What we're going to do now is to remove the spring so there is space to pull out the screws which are holding together the linkage. So these are the two screws which we have removed the nut on the opposite side. The one we're going to remove now is this one here that is holding the rear shock. This one. Here's again a wrench socket number 14 to fix it on this side. Then we go to the opposite side. So now you're going to knock this screw to the opposite side. Here you can see on the opposite side. Here you can see it's totally dry, so we'll take the chance to put some grease in here. Now that you have disconnected the linkage, we're going to remove this next nut in here. And that is the one that's fixating the rear shock at the bottom. And now you can pull the screw out from this side. So here you can see what you want to have it. The joint linkage is totally disconnected, only being held by this top screw. And your shock is actually already released, just missing now at the top, but in here at the bottom is already released. So here on the right side you can see where is the top screw. That's this screw right there. That's the one that is holding the rear shock on the top. Now here from the left side. And just be careful that also here you're going to have a washer and a nut. The shock is just being held by the screw, but as soon as you push the screw through, then the rear shock is going to be released. So have the hand, you're holding the rear shock and push the screw to the opposite side. So I'm pulling the screw. In order to greasen all of the linkage in here, all of the screws of the linkage, I'm also going to remove this screw here just to put the grease, otherwise it's optional. So now let me show to you the correct position of installing the rear shock from Wilbers on your CRF300L. You have to look for the label which says caution. This label here is going to be pointed forwards. And here on the reservoir and also where you have the adjustment, this is going to be turned to the left, so you can adjust this from the left. So it's mounted like this. The way you're going to mount, you're going to take the top screw and you're going to hold it in position and at the same time pass the screw through the rear shock. Now I'm going to remove this side cover that protects the rear shock. In order to install this rear shock from Wilbers that has the side reservoir, I'm going to have to remove the exhaust pipe so I can insert the rear shock into the motorcycle. So now that the rear shock is in position, I'm going to line up the top hole with the screw so I can pass the screw through. So now we're going to reconnect the link joint. And on the opposite side I'm going to put the washer and the nut. Now for the time being, I'm not concerned about putting the final torque. I just want to fix everything in place, and then in the end I'm going to give the final torque. Next we are going to connect the shock to the link. To the shock lower nut, we're going to give it a torque of 44 Newton meter. And now also for the top nut of the shock, 44 Newton meter. Newton meter. The one inside 44 Newton meter. So just attention in here. This screw here is the only one which is different. All the other ones have a hex head size 14, but this one has a hex head size 17. On this screw you're going to apply 74 Newton meter. So here now I'm going to reconnect the spring of the rear brake. And that is the step-by-step on how to exchange the rear shock from your CRF300L or maybe another motorcycle, in case this video has also helped you. Now I just have one final tip here for you. In my case, the rear shock I have installed is also a rear shock that is lowering the motorcycle by 30 millimeters. So the rear shock itself is 30 millimeters shorter, which lowers the motorcycle. In case you do the same, there's one thing you have to consider. My side stand is now too high for it. So even if I would just turn the handlebar to the right side, you see the motorcycle wants to tip over because the side stand is simply too tall for considering the lowering of the motorcycle. In this case, you also need to change or adapt the side stand. If you also need help with that, just take a look on the next video that's here on the screen. See you!